stop reporting dollars and cents to the board all the time. Start reporting retention numbers, start reporting relationship numbers. That's all they see, that's all they're going to measure.
I'm Rich Frazier.
And I'm Russ Fanos.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement.
We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector.
Let's dive in. Welcome, listeners, to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. I'm your host, Rich Frazier. In today's episode, we're continuing the conversation that Russ started in our last episode, the importance of meaningful relationships with donors. And by the way, if you haven't heard that episode, please go and check it out. Today, we're looking at that topic through a different lens, though. How can nonprofits measure donor relationships, and why is that so important? In January, the Chronicle of Philanthropy posted an article titled, "Has the Giving Crisis Reached the Point of No Return?" It's an interesting read that looks at the steady decline in individual giving and some ways that nonprofits can mitigate that trend and even turn it around. But what caught my eye was the emphasis the article placed on the value of measuring relationships, not just revenue, which is something that I've been pushing for a long time. And I know my guests today have been too. And speaking of my guests, let's get to them and introduce them. Joining me today are two of my favorite fundraising consultants, Michele Rebeor and Beth Silverstein. Will you please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about you? Michele, you go first.
Okay, thank you again, Rich. I'm thrilled to be back on with IPM, talking about one of my favorite subjects ever. My name is Michele Rebeor. I'm the co-founding partner of Synergy Philanthropy Consulting, and I have been in the development fundraising world, primarily in Arizona, but some national work as well, for a little over 30 years, and have been consulting for 10. I worked in healthcare, higher education, social services, human services, in all of my career roles. But return on relationship is something I've been focusing on for many years. I have a niche expertise in donor engagement and retention, and was very specifically, additionally, with women-focused engagement with women as donors, understanding women as donors.
Well, thank you for being here and welcome back to the show. And Beth, as always, it's a pleasure to see you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Rich. It's so exciting to be on this podcast with you guys. Individual giving is really my sweet spot. I have been working in major gift development for almost 40 years now and really doing a lot with principal giving. And relationship building is the foundation for all of it. And it doesn't matter whether you're giving $1 or $1 million. It's the relationship that guides that giving. So this is a really important topic for me, and I am very excited to hear what everyone has to say today and to think this through with you guys together.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks for being back on the show. So let's then jump into this idea of a crisis in individual giving. And I put sort of air quotes around that because, I always think about lies, damn lies, and statistics. But when you read through this stuff, it does look pretty dooming, right? So according to the Chronicle article, the last 2 decades have seen a steady decline in the number of households giving to charity, less than half compared to 2/3 of the households giving to charity 20 years ago. And of course, the Giving USA report released last summer said giving by individuals is the lowest that it's been in 40 years, down to 64% of individuals giving to charity versus 81% in 1982. So these do appear to be pretty alarming statistics. So let's just start with what you are seeing among your clients. Are you seeing that same thing? Are your clients seeing those same sorts of drops? And if so, how are they reacting to it?
I think that the article was spot on. I definitely see rise in major gifts and really focusing on the high impact, high level donor. What I see that I think is alarming is the loss of grassroots support. And that donor pipeline that traditionally started with somebody making their $20 annual fund gift and moving up the donor pyramid and then making their $1,000 gift and then moving up the donor pyramid, et cetera, I'm seeing less of that pipeline engagement. And I'm seeing almost a dichotomy where there's a lot of effort, of course, into the major gift world. And we're seeing donors just continually falling off of the pipeline at the grassroots level.
Michele?
There's always has to be a balance. And over the years, as our environment, our world environment has become very transactional. Our entire world, everything is immediate, right? Nobody builds relationships anymore in family and friends. Forget about business, right? But as a general rule, there's a lot of lack of relationship building among us as humans. I mean, a lot of lack of understanding, a lot of lack of curiosity, very polarizing opinions. So that has translated to the nonprofit world, and it has been going on for a while. This shouldn't be a shock to anybody who's been doing this for long enough. I've been preaching return on relationships since the mid 2000s. So this is nothing new, but it's a direct result of how we engage as a society now. Very limited, very immediate satisfaction, very little curiosity when it comes to really getting to know people and places and things.
Well, then let me ask the big how question. I mean, fundraising is transactional, philanthropy is relational. We know that as consultants, and experienced fundraisers know this, but how do we move beyond the transactional and back to the relational?
In my opinion, it has to start from the top. If you don't have leadership that understands this and they're only looking at the dollars, then you can never fix the structure. So it has to start from the top. And that also means the board. So there's a wide number of opportunities that you can use to create awareness, create education, both with, even if you're CEO, if you're a development officer and you know this, but your CEO does not, or your board chair, stop reporting dollars and cents to the board all the time. Start reporting retention numbers, start reporting relationship numbers. That's all they see. That's all they're going to measure. So that's just how it's been. And so you have to kind of look back on what your responsibility is in creating this environment for your leadership and your volunteers and your board and your donors.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Nonprofit boards tend to focus on financial metrics, but the thing about financial metrics is that they're lagging indicators. The other things, the work that goes into those financial metrics, it's the number of prospects in our pipeline, it's the number of cultivation calls, the number of solicitations, the number of successful solicitations. All of those things are leading indicators, and it's the leading indicators that will get us the outcomes, the results that we want, that will lead to those lagging indicators that lead to our fundraising and financial trends. And those are the things that we need to be presenting to our boards of directors on a regular basis. We need to be measuring them, and wait for it, we need to be rewarding them. We need to reward for the effort.
Celebrate.
And not just for the dollars that come into the door. And that, my friends, might also result in better fundraiser retention.
Yes.
Beth, I'm going to jump to you, though, because you had your hand in the air. Our listeners can't see your hand in the air, but I can.
Yes, because I think that board engagement, and most nonprofits have a board structure with committees, right? Most of us have a development committee, and we, as that reports up to our board. And what we fail to do is utilize them fully in this piece of work, where we've got to get more creative. We've got to use them as our ambassadors, engage them in the process of engagement. How many of us really sit down and assign our board stewardship calls, our board members? How many of us sit down with our development committee members and ask them to write personal handwritten notes, or to look at our lists of donors and say, wait a minute, I know that person. How do we take these connection points that are so critical in donor engagement, and we augment our team and engage our board and engage our development committees?
That's exactly what we're spending a lot of time doing with our clients right now. We might be engaged in a certain, even a campaign or a feasibility study, and all of a sudden we're teaching boards because nonprofit organizations don't have the number of staff to do all the work. It's a fact of life. not ideal, fact of life, even more so than maybe it's been in the past. So strategically using volunteers and your committee is vital to extending the stewardship, the practice of stewardship and cultivation. They do not have to be asks. They just need to help in the stewardship. But it's also a very specific kind of activity. You can't just say, go do it. You have to teach them and provide the resources and give them the confidence and celebrate the successes. I love that, Rich, because I have a thing that says, recognize, activate, celebrate, repeat. It's not you're on a repeat. But what we're doing a lot is really taking it to the nitty gritty and not presenting all of this conceptual, this is how fundraising works, this is how stewardship works, but what do we have in your organization that we can do? How do you write thank yous? We'll provide copy that they can edit and adapt to their own. Here's how you write a thank you to a donor. Here's how you do it. You make a phone call first. If they don't answer, you make a email or a handwritten. Give them help. Give them copy. Tell them why and how important it is, but make them accountable. So you've got to track, and that's a lot of times what falls through the cracks is the accountability. Best intentions are there, but if nobody's following up, how are you doing it? So every week, how did your calls go? Where are you at? What do you need help with? So we've gone to a point of weekly meetings and saying, how are these 5 people doing? Give them something reasonable, 2, 3, 4, 5, nothing. Don't give them a list of 50 or 60 because that's not going to work. And give them the options of phone, email, handwritten, with examples, with detail, with how do you do this? Why do you do this? What do you do after you do it? The follow-up, the donor documentation is critical. Create forms and formats and easy ways for them to report back the information and show the progression and how and why it works.
So what I'm hearing you say is sort of a paradigm shift. It's this transformational change in an organization about how we think as a board about fundraising. When I work with boards of directors and we talk about fundraising, I talk about this mental attitude about I'd rather chew glass than ask for money. I always say, if you'd rather chew glass and ask for money, guess what? We don't want you asking for money. We have other people who will do that. They're paid to do that, but we still need your help because there's this whole continuum of fundraising and activities along that continuum that you can help with and participate in that doesn't involve asking for money. And just as you said, sometimes it takes that transformational moment, whether it is a capital campaign or whether it's a strategic planning process, to get to the point where the board is willing to listen to that, to where we can go through that training and we can talk about that fundraising continuum and all these other elements of fundraising where they can play a role, and we can have these heart-to-heart conversations about, oh, you mean I don't have to chew glass? I can do this other thing, and that's still going to impact the bottom line, even though I don't have to ask for money.
Huge.
Okay, I'm down with that. Let me do it.
Yep. We have 8 things you can do to raise money without asking. It can be simply as forwarding emails and pieces of information to constituents and donors and friends and relationships. It can be the thank yous are the obvious, and they're really the most fun, quite honestly. Calling people up and saying, thank you for this gift. How do you know about us? Tell me about why you engage with our organization. And we just did this with an organization that's never had a development officer. It's a faith-based organization, and they only have volunteers. They have 1 staff who runs the whole organization. It's not a development role. And so we said they've got to raise money. And we used an event. They have an event coming up. So we used an event as to how to as the example, how to start asking for money for sponsorships, for tickets, for attendance, and the role of those. But your board has to be functional. And quite honestly, people forget board members and volunteers are donors. So in the process of doing this with them, you are stewarding and cultivating their gifts. And so you have to be thoughtful about who you're inviting to do this work, because it can also is a cultivation and a stewardship process for them.
How about that?
How about that? Even your staff are donors, and you need to steward them and cultivate them. People forget that.
Hey, let me step back for a moment. So I want to talk about the major gifts part. So we know that we need to focus on major gifts. We have to do major gift fundraising and as much as we can, because That is the biggest impact, the fastest impact. But we can't do it at the risk of our annual fund donors and the grassroots donors. So how do we balance that? How do we keep those grassroots donors coming back? How do we take what we know about relationship building at the major gift level and apply that at the grassroots level?
This is something that I think about all the time. It is, kind of the rule in development, it's the same rule in sales. It is a whole lot better if you can retain your customer than trying to find a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how we work with our major gift donors. We talk to them about their impact. They feel like they have made a very real difference. And we keep them engaged because we're able to demonstrate that impact, and we're able to satisfy something really deep inside of them. There's a place where passion and an organization intersect that's truly magical. Why are we not using those same strategies for our annual fund and recurring donors? You may be giving $10 a month, but that adds up over the course of a year. What's my impact at $10 a month? So if somebody is giving $10 a month and they're just getting your standard thank you every single month, that just becomes like wallpaper to them. They don't see it. They don't read it. They don't look at it anymore.
Right.
They don't feel their impact, but if we did a little bit more work on our end and every month they got a different stewardship piece that said, hey, we were able to do this because of you.
Yeah.
That's really where I feel like stewardship. If we were measured on stewardship, we would see a lot more donors hanging on to us.
I completely agree, Beth. Again, with this automated world, we've come to accept somehow this. If I found out in our clients, we changed this fast, but somehow you give online, you want everybody to give online, and you hit submit, and you get this automatic reply, thank you for your gift. And that's it. And it shocks me when clients say, yeah, that's their thank you gift. And I'm like, what? No. No, that's just a recognition that you got they got you, that you received their gift. That is not a thank you. It's an automated. So we have to be sending out thank yous still, using snail mail, or email, whatever's effective and efficient for your organization. It doesn't really matter anymore, but a personalized thank you that is addressed to them, that shows the impact and appreciates their gift. And then put a plan in place. This is it. This is my bottom line to all of this. Success only comes when the plan is part of your day-to-day functions. So you've got to have a stewardship metrics plan, whatever you want to call it, that indicates for new donors, for this size donor, for this size donor, for this size donor, what type of activity they are going to be, they get, what kind of recognition they get or activities are they invited to. And it's a very simple matrix type thing. You can do it in a spreadsheet, doesn't have to be fancy schmancy. If you've got a nice CRM, which most people do, you can plug it into the CRM so it becomes a little more automated or has reminders set up, but it has to have a plan. You cannot react. We do not have the capacity anymore to just simply react and remember. So we've got to put a plan in place, assign it to certain people, whether it's volunteers, staff, or otherwise. And that will help create those activities that Beth was just talking about. Invite them to this event, talk to them about this activity, whatever your type of mission is. But if you're an arts mission, we have this show going on. Bring them to a lunch to see the rehearsal. Put those types of activities in a stewardship plan. And when they're written, they're scheduled, they're accounted for, they tend to happen.
Hi, this is Curtis Schmidt, producer of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, then we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM Advancement, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
This article talked about the impact of giving platforms like GoFundMe and how that impacts our statistics. So I want to ask you your thoughts on that. So first of all, are you seeing a difference in how nonprofits are adjusting their outreach to engage younger donors who might prioritize different causes or forms of engagement compared to older generations?
Well, this is such a hard one.
I'm with you. That's why I didn't jump in.
Such a hard one. I have a couple of different clients with really different demographics. One is more of a traditional model. It's a traditional charitable model. And their donors are aging. And, I worry about that a lot. What are they going to do to really engage a younger demographic? Their entire CRM is filled with folks who don't really respond to social media that much. And then another organization, they are really kind of rocking it with social media, and they're rocking it with reaching a younger demographic and creating, kind of a society for young professionals and engaging them with real hands-on stuff. And that's working really well. I mean, they're seeing that kind of almost crowdsourcing, type of opportunity. But then how do you really work those and focus them in to become that engaged donor in a pipeline? So I see that social media is going to be a huge part of reaching a completely different demographic. We know that this demographic is charitable. We know they are. We know that they're generous, but they're giving to non-traditional charities, and they're giving in non-traditional ways. You can go to any GoFundMe if you've ever experienced or been a part of a GoFundMe campaign that has, kind of touched your heartstrings. They are raising amazing amounts of money. I don't know that I've got the answer here at all. I do know that it is imperative that we reach all of our demographics the way they need to be reached. And again, that's going to have to come back to a plan, because as much as you can automate, as much as you can do and still make it feel personal is the only way to go. And every organization is understaffed when it comes to a development team.
Michele?
Going back to that stewardship plan is about also segmenting your donors. And that can be by age, can be by type of gift, it can be by length of giving to the organization, it can be by gender, because everybody gives differently. The bottom line to all of that is knowing your donor. It's still a relationship. And getting likes on a page, as fun as it is to see a bunch of people liking whatever you posted, that is not a relationship, and it typically isn't a donation. Yes, you can post those social media, get people following you, but you still have to engage with them and get them engaged with you in a way that's meaningful and the way that's intentional, not just through a post of some sort. So the question becomes, is you engage people or introduce people to your organization and the activities and opportunities through social media, but then you have to give them an opportunity to get to know you and you to get to know them. And that post is not, 20 posts a day is not going to do that. It'll inform, but it won't necessarily engage or donate.
Right.
There's tons and tons of research on generational giving and what they tend to give to and how they tend to give. But focusing on how they give is really not where you want to be. It's why they give and what that sweet spot is that Beth talked about. Where's the sweet spot, that mutual benefit of your mission and their mission? Because it's always about the donor, and we forget that. We forget that it's about how we as an organization can help the donor meet their needs, not about our needs. How can we help them meet their needs by giving to our organization? So you have to know what their needs are to help them, right?
Right.
And then it might not be the right match, and that's okay. But segmenting donors, you don't have to segment them a million different ways, but 3 or 4 sections will help you better communicate with them and in different ways.
Michele, I think you're so spot on with that. I want to do a quick follow-up on the GoFundMe and Kickstarter type giving platforms, because one of the things that was called out in the Giving USA article last summer was that while individual giving to charities is dropping, the number of folks who are giving to these other giving platforms is on the rise. And so is there a way that nonprofits could leverage platforms like GoFundMe and Kickstarter to their advantage?
The reason why those platforms are popular is because of them meeting a donor exactly where they want to be, and they can see the impact immediately. So I think it's not how do we leverage those platforms, is how do we provide that experience to our donor? How do we do that? How do we take the lessons we learned from that and turn that into donor engagement and commitment and real personal satisfaction with their giving?
I think that's a brilliant answer. I want to take another left turn now. I want to talk more about the idea of shifting the focus from purely financial metrics in the CEO's office and in the boardroom to relationship building and fundraising. If we're going to start measuring relationships, or if we're going to encourage all our nonprofit listeners to measure relationships, what's the advice we're going to give them? How do we do this?
I think each organization has to determine what their goals and priorities are and where they're at in terms of stewardship first. Do a little bit of a stewardship audit. What are they doing now? What's working, what's not? And then you can better refine what you're going to measure. But when I'm advising people on how to adapt their metrics, their evaluation for their fundraising and their fundraisers, we have to, obviously, the leadership has to understand this, has to agree to it and recognize that it's going to be different.
Yeah.
And communicate that. But there's a few different options. I first and foremost suggest that portfolios are reduced or managed in a way that you can turn in and turn out more, so that there's a smaller number to work with and not 200 or 150, because that's just not feasible to maintain real relationships with.
A lot of chief development officers are rolling over in their offices right now. So explain that comment.
Nobody likes me when I say this, but again, we're talking about meaningful. To maintain a relationship, it's really about the long-term value, and we have to earn trust, and we have to earn the right to ask for the gifts, whether it's small gifts or big gifts. And that's only to get to know, and that's the best way to do that, is to get to know your donors as best as possible. And your $10 donors, you might not get to know as well as your $1 million donors, but everybody deserves a relationship opportunity and an understanding of who they are and what they want to do. And when you can only contact, realistically, if you've got 150, 200 people in your portfolio, you just can only do so much. So getting to 1 or 2 real meaningful contacts a year is probably the most you can get with a portfolio that size. Or you tend to stay in the same 10, 20 who you can meet goals with, who are going to be your recurring donors all the time, or your big donors, or your that type of thing. And you stick to those 10 or 20. Mm-hmm. So by adapting a smaller portfolio and or measuring your percentage of portfolio contacts, how you get to 80%, 70%, 60%, 50%, and you can measure, put measurements along metrics that go along with that as success. That encourages people to get outside of their trusted 5, 10, 15 donors, because they now have to go see those people they don't know and get to talk to them in a meaningful way. And then redefine what that quality, meaningful term is to your organization.
If I'm a CEO or I'm a CDO listening right now, and I've just been advised that I need to lower my development officer's portfolio, right, but I need to increase the percentage of people that they have a meaningful relationship with. Does that translate then to more money in the door? Can I expect that to translate to more money in the door? Is there a psychological, emotional impact of donor engagement that leads to a willingness to give more and more often?
Yes. I mean, there's research galore that says, a real, intentional, trusted, genuine relationship with somebody will lead to more giving. If you know them and they know you, you will have more return on your investment. If you build your relationship properly, your ROI will build. Is it all going to happen in 6 months? Are you going to go from a hello, how are you, nice to meet you, to can you give me $100,000? No, you can't do that in 6 months. So again, that goes back to the recognition that relationships take time. And building a relationship, there has to be some patience involved. but you doesn't mean you don't have donors. It means you just put a smaller portfolio to contact, and you move people in and out regularly, right? So you still have a pipeline that you of people that when if this person's no longer viable, you rotate them. And your staff is happier when they can truly engage with somebody. They can get to the point of a real ask, as opposed to suddenly going, oh yeah, can you help us with this?
Mm-hmm.
And COVID proved it. The organizations where their donors really understood them, that had meaningful relationships, those organizations did very well through the pandemic. They had people knocking at their door, how can I help? The ones who did not, had very transactional relationships, suffered, froze, did not know what to do, how to communicate with their donors as to what was happening or what wasn't happening. And they panicked. And instead, so that COVID was a positive proof in the nonprofit industry about the value of building relationships over the long term.
So is there a complementary role that technology can play in building relationships, CRM systems, whatever? How can these tools be used to help personalize our donor experiences?
It has to be a moves management. However your donor system works, and my partner, Alan Knobloch, will be thrilled that I'm saying this. Whether you're a $10 donor or $1 million donor, there has to be moves management process built into your system, because you will never remember that you're supposed to follow up with them in 2 months or in 2 weeks or whatever. You have to document it and get it into the system, however it works. And they all have different ways of working, some better than others. So the activity, the next step has to be documented and put in there. So whatever that next step is, whether it's to contact them with more information, whether it's to get a proposal, whether it's to go have coffee, whether it's to invite them to something, that next step has to get in, targeted with a time and a date and an ask when and where appropriate.
What's the best moves management system that you've seen, Michele or Beth?
I've seen so many different ways. I don't know that they're all perfect. Donor Perfect seems to have a pretty good one. Bloomerang does well.
So I agree with both of those. I actually have a colleague right now that's really enjoying Bloomerang and the opportunities that brings. I have another client that's using Salesforce. Virtually all of the donor management systems, most of them, have a moves management module.
Yeah.
And if an organization chooses not to include that in their system, that's terrible. Every organization has to have some kind of moves management tracking system. And also now with CRMs, as good as they are, you think about the beautiful synergy between moves management and stewardship opportunities, where you can magnify a person greatly by having that stewardship plan and having all of that built into your CRM, and it just goes out beautifully over the course of a year or whatever period of time you pick, and then you are dovetailing with that. So it's already done for you. You've done all the work up front, and that goes, and then you move with it through the year.
Mm-hmm.
It's critical.
It's critical.
So what I'm hearing then from both of you is that the best moves management system is a moves management system that is integrated into your CRM.
The best moves management system is one that people will use.
Okay, well, you beat me to the punch.
That's exactly right.
It's one that people will use and know how to use. It goes back to the board training. It goes back to the staff training. It goes back to understanding the need, again, not just that it's there, but why it's there and the value it provides. So I don't care what you do with it, as long as it works, or as long as you'll use it.
So if you're listening and you don't have a great CRM and it doesn't have a moves management system built into it, that's not an excuse. If you have to use index cards as a moves management system, use index cards. There are homemade moves management systems out there, as long as you use it. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's go back to that board of directors that's laser focused on financial metrics. How do we shift their thinking from the myopic, we have to keep the lights on today type of thinking, to a long-term sustainability perspective? What do we say to them?
A board's role is about building sustainability for the long term of the organization. That's the bottom line to any board, no matter what kind of board it is. Their responsibility is to build practice and a foundation that sustains the organization over the long term. So going to them and saying, this is what you are here to do. You know this. This is not about tomorrow, getting $1 in the door today for tomorrow. It's about the long term. And we're going through our own internal audit, creating a greater sense of efficiency and effectiveness for the resources that we have. A large portion of that is about retaining donors and stewarding donors. It costs 5 times more to get a new donor than it does to keep a current one happy. So we're going to work on practices with you that are about retention, about engagement, and the value of that. We're not going to look at each donor for one gift. We're going to look at the lifetime value of the donor, because that in turn will be the sustainable practices. No matter who's in charge, no matter what development officer we have the foundation of sustainable practices that will in place, then that will build the long-term sustainability of the organization. All the other is just clutter.
Beth?
That's exactly right. We have so many different ways that we can raise money. And I really do think that data is everything. So, being very transparent with our board, we have had this many donors this year and these people dropped off. So we're going to focus on making sure that we retain these donors, and we're going to seek to grow these donors. I've done this message to virtually all of my client boards, and every one of them has been receptive. Mm-hmm. I think that from the board perspective, once you show them the numbers and you show them the dollars that it would take to bring more donors in versus working with the ones you have, whatever your strategy is to bring new donors in, working with the ones you have is always the most cost-effective strategy.
Yeah. Right.
You have to maximize relationships with your current donors. They're going to be the ones to bring in new people. They're going to expand their giving, and they're going to expand the knowledge and the advocacy for the organization. But you've got to build that internal culture before you can be successfully externally.
Okay, so it's about that time for us to wrap up. Before we do, I want to ask each of you, what's one thing you want listeners to take away from this conversation? It could be anything that we've talked about or something that hasn't even come up yet. Beth?
So the most important thing that we need to know as fundraisers is that our existing donors are precious to us. And we have to look at every single donor as if they were $1 million donor or have $1 million potential, and show them the impact of their gift and steward them and have a plan to do that.
Right on. Thank you. Michele?
I think my final bottom line to all of this is you have to plan. You have to create a plan. Take a deep breath. Think about what you're doing and why you're doing it when it comes to stewardship, and take the time and the resources to create a plan. The plan will drive the success. Create a simple plan, one that works for your organization, and understand the value of the plan for the long-term sustainability of your organization. And then share that plan with the people, the leadership, your volunteers, your board, your staff.
Love that. Love that. And I'm going to go back to the genesis of this episode, and that is the crisis mode of this article from the Chronicle Philanthropy, and even talking about sort of the future of philanthropy itself, and just remind us that every interaction with a donor is an opportunity to build trust, demonstrate impact, and deepen engagement, and that we're really talking about a paradigm shift from transactional fundraising to transformational engagement and relationship building. And that can actually save the institution of philanthropy as a vital force for good in our society. Beth Silverstein, Michele Rebeor, thank you so much for being on the show. How can our listeners find out more about you and the work that you do? Beth, you go first this time.
You can catch up with me through IPM Advancement and learn all about me and the work that Rich and I do together right there.
Awesome. Thank you. And Michele?
Same, you can catch up with me through IPM Advancement, and then also through synergyphilanthropy.com.
Beth, Michele, thank you again for joining me today. Thank you to our producer, Curtis Schmidt, and to you, our listeners. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.